Today's shiur begins at the Mishnah at the very top of Daf Nun Hey. Before we go to the Mishnah, we glance at the side of our Gemara, where we've written in the Nosei, the topic heading, and very simply, Mashmos Hamilim, we're going to be occupied with trying to figure out the meaning of the words Dogon and Tavua. Needless to say, as we have repeated oft times in our Gemara markings Nedarim, Daf Yomi Shurim, that the topic of Nedarim deals with words, how people speak, what are people's intents. Mere translation is not sufficient, and oftentimes by translating, you're committing yourself to a narrow explanation of the word in question. And therefore, as we have been practicing along the way, we avoid translating many words. I know that it poses a bit of frustration to those who are eager in understanding what is really being said, but for those who are interested in translations and committing themselves to translations, there are fine works available on the market. But personally, I don't want to commit myself to translating things that concerning which we don't have a very strong tradition on what they mean. And in today's shiur, we're going to be dealing with words that are actually quite common, Dogon and Tavua. What do they refer to? We can say in very general terms, you'll find Dogon and Tavua used in the context of grains, wheat, barley, oats, spelt, rye. These are examples of things that you would expect to find under the category of these words, Dogon and Tavua. However, how do you categorize other items? Different kinds of beans and legumes and what have you. So, we continue now with the Mishnah. Hanoider min ha-dogon, one who swears or vows not to consume dogon. Ozer beful ha-mitzri yovesh. Divrei Rebbe Meir. He is prohibiting upon himself this kind of vegetation as well. The pul ha-mitzri yovesh. The Rosh says, also before Mitzri Yovesh, we'll read the Rosh together. The Dogon, the word Dogon, kol mini de midgan mashmasha osim mimenu kri. It's all kinds of vegetation that when you harvest them, you would also make a kri, a pile out of them. I think it's safe to assume that when one harvests, let's say, the likes of tomatoes, he doesn't pile them up in a large pile. So you can rest assured then that Dogon would not include something like tomatoes. However, Pul HaMitzri Yovesh, which may be some type of dry bean, it's something that is midgan, something that you would make into a pile. And therefore, one who vows not to partake of dogon, he is prohibiting upon himself all kinds of kitnios. Kitnios is a term translated often as referring to legumes that one, upon harvesting, will make a pile out of it. That is Rebbe Meir's approach. We continue in the Mishnah. By vowing not to partake of dogon, you are prohibiting only the 5 specific types of grain that we made reference to before, the barley, the wheat, rye, spelt, and oats. Rebbe Meir Omer, hanoder min ha-tavua, eino osur elo mechameshes haminim. Avol hanoder min ha-dogon osur bakoil, umuter beperes ilin ubiyerek. So Rebbe Meir says that the idea of the Chamesh Saminim, which is something we saw in the name of the Chachomim when the use of Dogon was made, Rebbe Meir says if you say a vow not to partake of Tavua, that is restricted to the 5 types of grain. However, if one is noder min ha-dogon, that is far more inclusive. As the Mishnah says, Ozer Bakol. What is not included in Dogon are fruit from trees and vegetables. We cited the tomato example before. The Gemara. L'meimra, what the Mishnah suggests, is the Dogon kol de midgan mashma. Anything, any type of vegetation that upon harvesting you would make it into a pile. The Rashi, L'meimra de Dogon dechtiv b'kra, kol min de midgan mashma. Anything that you would pile up. Now the result of that is v'chayav b'maiser min ha-Torah. That would mean that on a Torah level of law, you would be obligated in separating the tithes that the Torah requires from all of these different kinds of vegetation. Anything that you would make a pile out of. V'afilu mishar minim. Even from things other than the specific grains that we mentioned. From the fact that you see this in the Mishnah, that one who swears not to partake of Dogon, you are forbidding yourself in many, many different things. The Pasuk, when speaking about tithes, says that one shall tithe midogon, tirosh, and yitzhar. Tirosh is a reference to wine, yitzhar is a reference to olive oil, but it also says Dogon. So from Dogon, as far as the Torah, Doraisa means laws you find in the 5 books of Moses. Those are Doraisa laws. And by saying that Dogon is inclusive of much more than just the specific grains we mentioned, then you're saying that all of those other items, all those legumes and beans that might be piled up, are chayiv, are obligated and being tithed on a Torah level. This leads us into the next question. Mosiv Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef challenges what we said based on a pasuk in Divrei Hayomim. It says, "Uchfrot tzadavar hirbu b'nei Yisrael reishis dogon tirosh v'yitzar v'chol tvuas sodeh u'masar kol lo roiv v'chulei." Rashi. Uchfrot tzadavar klomar kiblu aleim takantos shel Chizkiyahu. The pasuk in Divrei Hayomim is a pasuk referring to a time, we'll say, late in the first temple period. That the Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves the ruling of King Chizkiah, La'aser Hakol, to take tithes from all kinds of growths, agricultural produce. Kidichtiv hirbu b'nei Yisrael. The pasuk indicates hirbu from the word rov, increase. So that, according to this, there is an original, we'll say, pure Torah level expectation of tithing, and then a subsequent expanded idea of tithing. So we have to define then what's the original concept of tithing. The Rashi continues, "I amras bishlama dogon, the dogon lo mashmelo mechameshes minim." If you say that dogon in fact is quite limited to the 5 varieties of grain, hainu d'asakra l'meimor, the pasuk in Divrei Hayomim that we cited, uchfrot tzadavar, that pasuk comes to say hirbu b'nei Yisrael da'afilu davar shalom nischayev v'maisim min haTorah. Even things that are not obligated to be tithed from a purely Torah perspective, could go sha'ar, mini, the midgini, like other things other than the grains, the beans and legumes that are piled up. Then, as we said, the pasuk would make sense that there was the increased practice of the Jews reflects an increase from what the Torah's narrow definition was to an increased definition in the time of Chizkiah. If you'll say that the word dogon is all inclusive of everything that's piled up, what is meant then by the pasuk in the Divrei Hayomim that says that there was increase? What were they doing any more than that which the Torah already obligates them? We read the Rashi, now we go back to the Gemara, which says everything we just said, but in a terse form. The Gemara, V'hi Amris, Dogon called the Midgan Mashma. If you're going to say that the word Dogon is all-inclusive, anything that you harvest and pile up, my Kifroit Sadava Hirbu, what was their subsequent increase in practice when the original Torah concept is quite inclusive? Omar Abaye. Abaye says you can maintain the suggestion of the Mishnah that Dogon is in fact quite inclusive. The question then was regarding the pasuk in Divrei Yomim, what did they come to add? I'll tell you, the answer is Lasiyah Peros So'ila V'Yerek. What they added, which even the word Dogon does not include, are fruits and vegetables. So that the later increased practice was, whereas the Torah says that Dogon is chayav in tithing, and as we said, that might be quite inclusive, but as far as the Torah is concerned, fruits and vegetables did not need tithing. Later, in the time of Chizkiah, a takana was established, a ruling was established that even fruits and vegetables are to be tithed. Rabbi Meir Omer hanoidim min hatavua v'chulei. Omar Rav Yochanan hakol noidim v'nodim min hatavua shein osur ela machameshes haminim. Rav Yochanan says that all agree that if a person in his vow said he's not going to partake of tavua, he is prohibiting himself only from the 5 types of grain that we listed before. Tanya Nami Hachi, a Brisa supports Rabbi Yochanan. V'shavin v'nodim min hatavua. There is agreement when it comes to someone vowing not to partake of tavua. Shein osur elo mechameshes haminim. The Gemara says, Pshita, is this not obvious? Doesn't everyone understand that the word tavua is a reference to the 5 types of grain? The Gemara says, no. Mahu detemo tavua kol mili mashma. One might have thought that the word tavua has an inclusive connotation. Kol mashmalom delo mashma kol mili. So our Tanaic source and Rabbi Yochanan are telling us, don't think thusly. Mosiv Rav Yosef. Interestingly, as we saw before, Rav Yosef challenges. Here too, he challenges from the pasuk, the same pasuk we had before. Uchfroi tzadavar hirbu b'nei Yisrael, v'chol tvuas sodeh larov. Now, what exactly is the question? So we take a look at the Rashi, where we have a star across from here in the Rashi. Tvuas sodeh larov, alma de tvua mashma kol mili. The expression tvua seems to be including quite a bit more than the 5 grains. Da dechtiv tvuas sodeh lav mechameshes minim komar. The pasuk is clearly not referring to the specifically or the limited 5 grains. The ikru tvua and the word tvua appears in the context of something that's beyond the 5 grains. We might elaborate a bit. The pasuk describes additional tithing that wasn't required before, that wasn't required by the Torah. With regard to the 5 grains, that was required to be tithed from the Torah. So this pasuk, Ufrotz Davar, the pasuk from Divrei Yomim, using the word tvua, is not referring to the 5 grains, which was obligated anyway in being tithed. The Gemara answers, Omar Rava, tvua l'chud, tvuas sodeh l'chud. There are 2 different expressions. There's the basic word tvua, that is, as Rabbi Yochanan said, only the 5 grains. When you see a compound expression, tvuas sodeh, that includes much more. We continue with a glance at the side, the nosei, the topic heading, Mashmos Hamila Erlalta. We're going to see a word, an Aramaic word, Erlalta, and try to understand what it means. The Gemara. Bar Mor Shmuel Pokid, the son of Shmuel, announced in establishing his will, we'll say his desires of property distribution upon his death. The lesnun tleisar alfi zuzi l'rava min arlalta denahar panya. If we try to, outside of the word alalta, we'll just try to translate the rest of the expression. Bar Mar Shmuel wants to give to Rava. Tleisar, lesnun means to give. Tleisar is 13. Tleisar alfi, 13,000. Zuzi. Zuzi is a coin, a denomination of currency. So he wants to give Rava 13,000 zuzi from Alalta. Alalta dinar pan. Dinar pan is the name of a place. So the only truly obscure expression here is Alalta. Sholcha Rava l'kamei de Rav Yosef. Alalta hechi mikri. Rava sent to his Rebbe, Rav Yosef. He said, what is included in Alalta? In other words, I've got 13,000 dinar worth of Alalta coming to me. What is it? Omer Rav Yosef masnisinhi. The Mishnah will answer your question. Vishavin benodir min hatvua shein osur ela mechameshes haminim. We glance at the Ran commentary. Eino osur ela b'chameshes haminim. V'avisvira leila Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef is of the opinion that Kevon da'alalta targum tevuahu. The Ran doesn't mention this, but it is noteworthy that Rav Yosef throughout the Shas was an expert in Targum. Targum is the traditional Aramaic, I would say translation, but it's more accurate to say explanation of the Torah. In the Torah, the word Tavua appears. And Rav Yosef holds that the word Alalta is the Aramaic equivalent of the Hebrew word Tavua. And what's Tavua? Chameshes Haminim Bilichud Mashma. Since Alalta is the Aramaic version of Tavua, and Tavua is limited to the 5 types of grain, so Rava is entitled to collect 13,000 dinar worth of grain, of the 5 specific varieties of grain: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. Omar le Abaye. Abaye asks Rav Yosef, Mi domi, how do you compare Tavua lo mashma elo mechameshes haminim? The word Tavua implies, is used in reference to true, only the 5 grains. Alalta kol mili mashma. The Ran explains Alalta kol mili mashma. The Alalta loshen. Alalta is itself a word that refers to bia, v'achnosa, v'shevach. In Aramaic, you find the word erl is to enter. It's an enter of. It has to do with entrance, bringing things in. Also, shevach, things that improve, things that increase in value. The Rashi says also, alalta mashma kol mili she'oilel mishabech, anything that rises and improves. Vafilu mishar perish and mishabchin, and that would include even things beyond the 5 types of grain. Tziva ligvois mehem, all kinds of growth. They start off in seed form, and they grow, and they develop, they enlarge, and eventually are sold for value amounts of money much more than the original seed was worth. So Mar Shmuel was giving to Rava 13,000 dinar worth of alalta. That's not an instruction to gather or to collect only from the 5 varieties of grain. Ahadruhu l'kamei de Rava. So what Abaye said was then reported to Rava. Omar. Here we have Rava. He opens with a statement that lasts a couple of lines. You can see we've marked it thusly. Rava says, Ha lo komibaya li da'alalta komi li mashma. It was never a question to me that alalta includes many different things. There's a comment in the Tosfos on the third of the wide lines of the Tosfos. All fruits are called are referred to by the term alalta. Called davar oichlin mikri alalta. V'chein shar nechosim the alalta midi dehu bi'ain mashma. The word alalta means anything that is extant. Ki komid boyalei, what Rava was not clear on was schar botim, schar sfinos, mi amrinon. Schar is income derived from renting houses, renting boats. Mi amrinon kima de botim sfinos pochasim b'chol yom umishtanim. Do we say that, well, boats and houses are things that as day after day, as time goes on, they depreciate. There is natural depreciation in these items. So therefore, lav b'chlal alalta, rent income, the schar botim, schar sfinos, rent income would not fall under the category of alalta. The alalta mashma midi de mishabeach, v'lo midi de poches. Alalta implies something that increases, not something that decreases, that goes through depreciation. So this is part of what Rava was not sure about, as the Gemara will explain, but quite briefly. So, to review the point that we started, Rava says that it's to me it's obvious, says Rava, along the lines of Abaye, that alalta is quite inclusive of much more than the 5 types of grain, which, by the way, is certainly is a refutation or a repudiation of what Rav Yosef had said. So Rava says, to me it's very clear that alalta is quite inclusive. Hada hu ba'ili, but it's the following that I'm not sure of, that I'm in doubt of, and I have to know with regard to what exactly am I entitled to as per Mor Shmuel's will. Schar botim uschar sfinos mai. What about collecting the 13,000 dinar from rent? The rent income of Mar Shmuel's houses and boats. Mi amrinon, and now we have 2 sides of the analysis. Mi amrinon kivan de pachson lav alalta. Do we say that since houses and boats experience depreciation, they're not included in alalta? Oy dilmo kivan de lo yadia pachsayu, or maybe since the daily depreciation is not something that is quite obvious, it's a very slow type of depreciation, alalta hi, it's considered nevertheless in the realm of alalta, since they do produce income. The Gemara continues, Amrua Rabbanon Kamei Rav Yosef. That which Rava said, that alalta is poshut, it's clear that it's very inclusive, this was told to Rav Yosef. Omar, Rav Yosef said, he was slighted, he was insulted, if you will. And Rav Yosef says, since you don't need me, you asked me originally what's alalta. And now it's quite clear you knew all along in your mind what alalta is. So since you don't need me, why did you bother sending the question to me? Ikbid Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef was upset. He was slighted. Shoma Rava. Rava heard that Rav Yosef had been made upset. He approaches Rav Yosef on Erev Yom Kippur. Now, Erev Yom Kippur, of course, is the time that people try to make amends. They want to atone for their sins, and as is very well known, Yom Kippur, though it's known as a day of prayer and supplication, nevertheless, all of the pleas cast heavenwards will bear no fruit when the affront for which one is pleading was committed to a fellow man, unless the fellow man who was slighted is approached for forgiveness. And that's exactly what Rava's intention was. He approached Rav Yosef Erev Yom Kippur to straighten their relationship, to straighten matters out. And it's important, for the purpose of appreciating the story, to realize that Rav Yosef himself was a non-sighted individual. He was a blind person. We continue in the Gemara. Rava, upon approaching Rav Yosef's residence, found his servant preparing a cup of wine for Rav Yosef. Wine preparation is, as far as in the time of the Gemara, before people had available bottled wine, people made their own wine. And in the time of the Gemara, after you prepared the basic wine from the fermented grapes, the resultant wine was too strong to be drunk straight. So water was added. There was something we call dilution. And that's what we refer to as mozig or meziga. Adding water to the wine concentrate. What was the ratio wine-water? So there was we'll say the popular approach we'll use an example that is actually seen elsewhere in the Shas, and we'll just use it for illustrative purposes for this story. Common dilution was 2 parts water for every 1 part wine. Rava diluted wine more than that. He added 3 parts water for 1 part wine. That was Rava's practice. So as we say, the story now continues. Rava meets the shamash about to prepare a cup of wine involving the dilution of it for Rav Yosef. Omar lei, Rava says to the servant, Hav li the amzig lei ano. Let me prepare the wine. Yohav lei, so he did. He gave to him the komozik iu kosa dechama, and Rava prepared the cup of wine. Ki koshosi Omar, when Rav Yosef drank the wine, again, Rav Yosef was not cited. When he drank the wine, he said, Hodein mizga domi la mizga de Rava breda Rav Yosef bar Chama. This reminds me of the way Rava prepared wine. And as we explained, Rava's practice was to dilute the wine more than, we'll say, was ordinarily done. So Rav Yosef tasted the difference and says, this reminds me of the way Rava used to prepare wine. Omar lei hu nihu. So he said, yeah, this is Rava. Omar lei. So Rav Yosef said to Rava, Lo teisef akarach, I don't want you to sit down, ad de amrisli pirusha de hadein milsa, until you explain to me the following. The Rashi, you see, second line from the bottom, Lo teisef akarach v'chulei. We'll be able to appreciate this Rashi as the Gemara unfolds, but nevertheless, as by way of introduction, Lefi shehekis libo, Rashi says, because Rava had, say, demonstrated an air of haughtiness. Sho'al loy mikra zeh kidei lahashpil daita. Rav Yosef was quite, intentional, quite planned in presenting this question to Rava. In other words, it's not as if Rav Yosef didn't know the explanation of the pasuk that he is now going to be asking Rava, but rather he had a message that he wanted to convey to Rava without hitting him between the eyes. Rather we'll call it a somewhat hinting fashion that Rava will get the message. So very simply, Rav Yosef had been slighted by what Rav Yosef perceived as an element, an air of haughtiness on the part of Rava. So he wants to, we'll say, reduce Rava from this expanded air about him. The Gemara continues. My dichtiv, what is the meaning of the following pasuk? We should point out the following pasuk has a very simple translation level, and that is, it describes the different way stations of the Jews during their sojourn in the wilderness upon their exodus from Egypt. So the list of places, but Rav Yosef, and you see this in other places in the Shas, that the names of places have significance. And in this case, not only the names, but the sequence of the names has significance, has a message behind them. And as the Gemara reads, the Pasuk says, Umi midbar matana, Umi matana nachliel, Umi nachliel bomos. They, again, on a translation level, they went from a place called Midbar to Matana, and then from Matana, they went to a place, their next way station was Nachliel, and from Nachliel went to Bomos. Omar lei. So Rava explains. And here we have a new marking, a volcano or trapezoid shape. On the side, we have a nosei mivneh heading, the topic heading combined with a structural note. These trapezoids represent shlavim b'drashim b'nosei midas hanava. These are stages in Rava's analysis, Rava's lecture, Rava's response with regard to the character trait of humility. So Rava says, Kevon she'oisa adam es atzmo k'midbar shu mufkar lakol. When a person makes himself like the desert is a place that is unowned. It's mufkar. It's declared unowned for the benefit of all. It's a place of, we'll say, a place of total insignificance. So dealing with the desert, and it's available to all. It's not a coveted area. The Rash, the Tosfos and the Rosh, they explain. If we look in the Rosh at the end of the Rosh, he says, person who is available to teach Torah to anyone who simply desires it. The lashon of the Tosfos is malame Torah lekol, someone willing to teach Torah to everybody. That's this idea of mufkar lekol. Just like the desert is a place that anyone can traverse, so too a person who makes himself like that is available to teach Torah to everybody. So then nitna loy b'matana, the Torah will be given to him as a gift. Now, we should point out a Gemara on Daf Lamed Ches that we learned in this Masechta Nedarim regarding Moshe Rabbeinu. He is described as someone who had learned and forgotten until the Almighty gave him the Torah as a matana. So we can assume that the term given as a gift is a reference to ability to retain Torah knowledge. Don't think this is a small matter regarding Torah study. There's a pasuk that says, that if you merely stop thinking about Torah, even momentarily, it flies away. Hatoif has as the root of the word the ayin pei, off, means something that flies away, like the word oif, a reference to a bird. So Torah is something that if you have a good imagination, if you use imagery, the Torah has wings on it. And that even though you study Torah, it's very, very easy to forget Torah. Much easier to forget Torah knowledge than all other intellectual pursuits. So to be granted the retention of the Torah is certainly a major gift. So one who makes himself available to teach Torah to all, the Torah will be given to him as a gift. And that's the juxtaposition of the words umi midbar, matana. If you make yourself like a midbar, you then get the Torah as a matana. Shinemar, umi midbar, matana. V'kevon, the Gemara continues 4 lines from the bottom, v'kevon shnitno lo b'matana, nachalo kel. And once someone retains the Torah, that he receives it as a gift, he is said to inherit a portion with the Almighty. That God becomes like his portion. Shenemar umi matana nachliel. The word nachliel is a compound. It's a name representing, or it's a compound word. Nachal, or the word is nachal, is to inherit, and keel, the Almighty. The kevon shenachalo keel oilu l'gdula. Once a person inherits
a portion of the Almighty, he rises to greatness. Shenamar uminachliel bomois. Bomo is a place of height. Needless to say, there are people that are known as great Torah personalities, and you'll find almost inevitably these great Torah personalities are people that retain great amounts of Torah knowledge. Here is really the core of the drasha. If a person, after rising to greatness, then becomes haughty, now there are great people, there are examples of great people that were very humble. The ultimate example is Moshe Rabbeinu. But there are those that don't meet the challenge. They achieve greatness, and then, as they say, it goes to their head. And that's what we're referring to here. If they become haughty as a result, the Almighty will see to it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashpila, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will lower them. Shenamar umibamos Hagai. In the travels of the Jewish people, they went from a place called Bamos to Gai, a valley, a deep, a low-lying area. V'lo'oid elo she'shoikfin oisoi b'karka. There is another girsa. The Gemara original text is she'shoikin oisoi b'karka. The idea of shokfin, you can see in the Tosfos at the very end. He says loshon iskupo hanidreses. It's an expression mashkof in this context is taken to mean the threshold of a doorway. What's the nature of the threshold of a doorway? It's trampled upon. It's stomped on. So that if a person who achieved greatness and as a result of that becomes haughty, the Kodesh Baruch Hu will cause it that he will fall and be not only fall but also get stomped on. Shenemar v'nishkefa al pnei hayeshima. The word nishkefa, mashkof, is in this context is the door threshold. V'im chazar boy HaKadosh Baruch Hu magbio. Now the dashed volcano shape is done deliberately. It's because up till now we were explaining words from the pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Chaf Aleph. Now, as far as the following message is concerned, a pasuk from a totally unrelated context is cited. But as far as ideas are concerned, there is the connection. So the Gemara says, and if a person after having, let's say, fallen from heights as a result of haughtiness, he does penitence, he's chozer bo, he changes his ways, HaKadosh Baruch Hu magbio, the Almighty will see to it that he rises again, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu lifts him up. And the Gemara continues at the top of Amid Beis, Shenemar Kol Gay Yinosei. Since we had the word Gai, Ubi Mamos Hagai, used in Bamidbar Chaf Aleph, so here you see a point of connection, even though this pasuk is from the book of Isaiah, from Yeshaya, Perek Mem. Nevertheless, that which is Gai, which is lowly, which is down in the valley, Yinosei, will be raised up. The Ran makes a comment on the fourth line from the top, Ulinin Halacha, regarding what practice should be done. Bayan de Rava lo Shita, the question of Rava of what is included in Alalta was never really answered conclusively. Rava himself expressed the doubt that even though Alalta is quite inclusive, does it include rent income from houses and boats? Is someone who was granted in a will 13,000 dinar of halalta able to collect from the rent income that is produced from houses and boats? So the Ran says, Hilkoch lo govi mischar botim mischar sfinas diad bala shtala tachtoina avalagabi nedarim naktinan lechumra v'kulan bichlal. So as far as monetary matters are concerned, to go and collect that was a questionable source of income, questionable in light of our doubt about what the word alalta includes, so you're not entitled to collect it. That's on a financial, monetary level. However, if a person, let us say, vowed, I don't want to benefit from alalta, he won't be entitled. The rent income will be considered alalta in order to be included in the restrictive vow. The Gemara continues. Tanya, hanoidim in a dogon, Ozer af beful hamisri yavesh umuter balach. Person who vowed not to eat or partake of dogon, that will include even the dry pul hamitzri. However, it won't include the fresh pul hamitzri. That's muter balach. Umuter, the person who had vowed not to consume dogon will be allowed. Be'orez, bechilka, betargis, ubetisni. Orez is often translated as rice. He's also entitled to eat. He's still able to eat from the. These are chilko, targis, and tisni are a reference to wheat grains that have been split. Chilko split into 2 parts. Targis split into 3 parts. Tisni is wheat grains that have been split into 4 parts. So even though he swore not to partake of dogon, and dogon certainly will include your basic wheat grain, but once the wheat grain undergoes change, this is a point that Rashi makes, second line from the top, since it undergoes change, it's split into smaller pieces, it no longer is included in the term dogon. Hanodir min Peiros Hashana, Ozer b'chol Peiros Hashana, a person who vows not to benefit from Peiros Hashana, literally the fruit of the year. What does that vow include? It prohibits him from all fruit of the year. Umuter b'gdai mitloim, u'b'cholov u'b'veitzim b'gozolos. However, Peiros Hashana does not include, in terms of this vow, he's not restricted from goats, sheep, milk, eggs, and birds. If, however, he said, Gidule Shana Olai, the growth of the year is upon me a prohibition, Ozer Bekulan. So, Gidule Shana will include all of the items we just mentioned the line before. Hanodir min Peiros Haaretz, someone who vows not to benefit from that, Peiros Haaretz, also b'chol Peiros Haaretz, and muter b'kmei u'pitrias. He is prohibited in all types of fruits and vegetables that grow forth from the land. However, he is allowed to consume kmein and pitrios, truffles, and mushrooms. The Imomar, if he phrased his vow, Gidule Karka Olai, Ozer Bekulan. And here there's no need to translate. You have to leave some room for flexibility as the Gemara continues. But in the meantime, we see an expression, Gidule Karkalai, one who uses that expression will be prohibiting himself in his vow, not only the fruits and vegetables, but the truffles and mushrooms, fungus growth. Veramini, we raise a contradiction. The source is from a totally unrelated context, but the connection is very strong all the same. The context of this source has to do with the brachos, the benedictions that one makes before partaking of different food items. And it says in this source, which will be contradictory to what we just said, Al davar she'ein gidulo min haaretz omer shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. On things that are not gidule min haaretz, one recites the shehakol bracha. For example, on a tomato, one will not say shehakol, he will say borei priho adama. On cheese, or on a piece of steak, a person will say shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. So things that are not gidulo min haaretz, one says a shehakol bracha v'tanya, al hamelach ve'al hazomis ve'al kmein u'pitrius oimer shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. And the Brisa says that on salt and on zomis, on kmein and pitrius, on truffles and mushrooms, one says shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. So, following the dashed underlining that we have in our marked Gemaras,
we see a term ein gidula min haaretz. That includes Kameim and Pitreus. The source before spoke about gidulei karka, including Kameim and Pitreus. So we've got to make up our mind. Kameim and Pitreus, are they gidulei karka or not? According to the first source, Kameim and Pitreus are gidulei karka. According to the second source, they are not gidulei karka. Omar Abaye. So Abaye explains, and in the back of our minds, we're going to have to think: is it possible that there's we'll say a dual standard, some kind of split with regard to vow making versus the standard for formulating benedictions? So Abaye says, Mirba Ravu Me'ara. Meinak me'aviro yanki velo me'ara. They mirba ravu me'aro, it means they grow forth from the ground, but their nutrients, their sustenance is from the air. As many of you are probably familiar, fungus growths are entities, they don't have roots drawing nutrients from the ground, but rather it's a function of their growth. It has to do with the spores and the like that travel through the air. The Gemara continues, V'hakatani, but regarding Kameim and Pitreus it says, Al davar she'ein gidulo min haaretz. How can Abaye say mirva, which is Aramaic, mirva ravu me'ara, which is to grow forth from the ground, when the Tanaic source says that the Kameim and Pitreus are ein gidulo min haaretz. They don't grow forth from the ground. Abaye answers, Tani, as far as the shehakol bracha is concerned, the source should have read as follows, or it should be understood thusly. Al davar she'ein yonek min haaretz. If something doesn't derive its nutrients from the ground, though physically they may emerge, they may develop on the ground, but since their nutrients are not from the ground, the bracha to be made is shehakol. The Tosfos clarifies. There's a little star in the Tosfos commentary. We've written in Mirba Ravu Me'aro Kameim and Pitreus Vade Me'aro Ravu. It's obvious, it's clear that the truffles and mushrooms grow forth physically from the ground. The Shapir Mikru Gidulei Karka, they can be referred to as things that grow from the ground. Avol Hayanika Shelahem, their nutrients, Eino Elo Me'avir Karka, comes from the air. You cannot recite the bracha, blessed be the Almighty who created the fruits of the earth with regard to Kameim and Pitreus. They don't derive their yanika, their sustenance, from the ground. So that as far as the sources are concerned, everything is fine. And if a person vows not to partake of gidulei karka, well, that will include Kameim and Pitreus. If a person wants to know what bracha you make on them, you'll make a shackle, because their nutrients do not derive from the ground, but rather through the air. And just on that last point, and as a result of their nutrients coming through the air, it would be inaccurate to describe them as borei pri adoma. The Mishnah. Before we continue in the Mishnah, we have a brief topic heading, Hanoder min ksus, one who vows not to benefit from ksus. The term ksus, as we see so many times as we learn Nedarim, here's an issue of translation and connotation. So one who vows not to benefit from ksus will say, think about the word clothing. So he swears not to benefit from ksus. Muter besak ubiyiriya ubachamila. He is allowed to wear
sackcloth, Yari and Chamila. It's an amazing exercise in attempting to understand this. When you just glance at the Tosfos and the Rosh, Tosfos describes sak, Yari, Chamila as einon begodim heim. They're not clothing. The Rosh under sak, Yari, and Chamila says mine begodim heim, types of clothing. As far as we're concerned, the Mishnah is declaring that one who swears not to benefit from ksus, that term will not include these kinds of materials. Sak in general is a sackcloth which is made from the hairs of goats. We continue in the Mishnah. Oimer kainim tsemer ola olai. A person phrases his vow that he prohibits himself from having tsemer. Tsemer is wool. Tsemer shall not arise upon me. That's literal. As a result of that vow, nevertheless, mutter liskasos begizei tsemer. He can cover himself with wool shearings. When he said tsemer oilolai, his intention is with regard to wool clothing, not wool shearings. Even though when you translate it, you don't see that. That's why it's important for the Mishnah to communicate what is a person's intention when he says that. Pishton oilolai, a person, let us say, vows. Pishton is a reference to flax. Flax is the raw material from which linens are made. And he says, Pishton oilolai, mutter liskasos ba'nitze pishton. He is allowed to cover himself with flax stalks. Or anitze pishton you see in the Gemara in Sukkah, and there it's defined as pishton as the linen flax in an early stage of development. In other words, it's certainly pre-clothing stage. So if a person said pishton oilalai, he's allowed to cover himself with anitze pishton. Rav Yehuda Omer hakoil lefi hanoder. When a person vows Semer oilalai or Pishton oilalai, these expressions are subjective. It all depends on the circumstances. There'll be a brisa brought in the Gemara that elaborates on this even further, but the Mishnah says, To'an v'hizia v'yareche kosher. A person, let us say, is carrying a burden of wool or of linen, of flax, and he's sweating away with a foul body odor emerging from him. And he declares, while sweating away, he just says this vow that I'm not going to have tsemer and pishtim rise upon me. A person like that is allowed to wear woolen and linen clothing. What he is prohibited in as a result of the vow is to carry them around as burdens. Literally, lahafshil is to sling them over his back, but means to carry around wool and linen plants, the wool shearings and unprocessed flax plants as a burden. Tanya hanoider min haksus muter besak bir b'chamila. A person who vowed not to benefit from ksus, he is not prohibiting himself from sak, yiril, and chamila. The Ozer, befunda, ubepiskya, ubeskurtya, uvekatavlaya, vanpilya, uplinya, umichnasai vekova. Most of these words are quite unusual for many of us. The Meforshim explain some of these words. In some cases you'll see some old French used, some translations. So, for our purposes though, the Gemara will be interested in what is skurtia. The term ksus, though, does include a number of other, say, clothing appurtenances. The punda is some type of hollow type of belt that people gird themselves with. Piskia, Rashi uses a French word. The scrutia word is something that the Gemara will try to understand. You'll find that the Rosh himself, when looking at this list, he simply says v'chol V'chein kol elu minei malbushim heim yesh shem shel or v'yesh shem shel beged. The Rosh doesn't delve into the translation of the things. Rather, he says they're all different types of clothing items. Some are made of leather, some are made of fabric. The katavlaya happens to be a leather type garment. And as we said, there are other words here. The Gemara, though, is interested in knowing my iskurtia. What is the iskurti? Omar Rabba Bar Barchana Kituna Ditzala. It's a garment made of skin of leather, or is leather. Malbush shel or. The Tosfos uses that term when explaining Kituna Ditzala. Pirush Malbush or. Some people wear this as we would wear a raincoat. This leather outer garment protects people from the rain. Tanya. The Tanaiv source features the laws of Shabbos, and in Shabbos there's a major area of law referring to transferring things from one domain to another, carrying from a private domain to a public domain, vice versa. Within that context, the source says, Yoitzin b'sak ova u'v'sagus ova. If a person has covered himself with thick sackcloth, or sagus ova, a type of sack that's thicker than urea, that's b'sagus ova u'b'urea u'b'chamila b'pnei agshamim. All of these can be worn to protect one from the rain. So that it wouldn't, if a person covers himself with sak ova, sagus ova, urea, chamila, he's not, and walks from a private domain out into the street while it's raining, he will not be in violation of the Isur Haitzah, because the Isur Haitzah doesn't include the clothing one wears. One is allowed, obviously, to walk out from a private domain to public domain while clothed. So wearing these things or covering oneself with these things is within the realm of permissibility on Shabbos with regard to Eitzah. Avol, however, even though a person wants to protect himself from the rain, lo b'teva v'lo b'kupa v'lo b'machzeles, one cannot walk out with a box inverted on his head, or a basket, or a mat over his head, simply to protect himself from the rain. Haroyim, royim are shepherds. Yoitzin besakim. The shepherds can go out on Shabbos and with sack on them, and there's no problem of carrying, of transfer of location. V'lo royim bilvad amru. The law doesn't concern or doesn't relate just to shepherds. Ela kol adam, anyone. Ela shedibru chacham b'hoiva. The chachamim's practice is to speak in common form, and it's common for shepherds to wear the sackcloth. The Rosh commentary, Yoitzim Besakim, he says b'Shabbos, v'ein b'hem mishum masui. There's no violation of carrying burdens from one place to another. Ki derech lotzes b'hem etnei agshamim v'adin below geshamim namishon. That's a very, very important addition that the Rosh is making, that since during the rain it's an acceptable form of clothing, even when it's not raining, it would be acceptable to go out with these types of coverings on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer hakol lefi anoder v'chulei. Tanya Ketzar Rabbi Yehuda hakol lefi anoder. What did Rabbi Yehuda mean that everything is in accordance with the vower? Haya lavush tsemer v'heitzar. A person was wearing some woolen clothing items, and he was very uncomfortable. Heitzar, he was experiencing discomfort. V'yomar, and he declared koinem tsemer olai, and he used that expression. Konam, an expression referring to a prohibition, a vow prohibiting tsemer, wool, from arising upon him. What is he intending? Also, lubosh umuter liton. His intention is to prohibit himself from wearing woolen clothing, but he's not precluding the possibility of his moving wool from one location to another. Liton means to carry around. Hoya ton pishton vizia, a person who was carrying linen or flax or wool shearings. The Rosh says that it could be included here as well. And he's sweating away. And he says this vow. The result is mutter lilbo. She'll still be allowed to wear linen clothing, the Ozer liton, but he will not be allowed to carry around, to move, to work as a transporter, lugging around linen, flax, and wool shearings. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.